Hello and welcome to another FPL video. My name is Steve and today we're going to be discussing lessons learned from previous seasons to have a bit of a recap of different notes from the bits and pieces I have written down from previous overall season reviews and tips and tricks that I've learnt across the years of playing the game. If you do like the following content, please do give this video a like and subscribe to this channel for notifications of more videos coming out soon. So, to start with, I thought I would talk about captaincy, because captaincy, in my view, is one of the most important choices of each game week, and something that you really do need to plan for. Um, Across the 38 game weeks, you get to play a captainship every 38 game weeks, and one of those game weeks will be a triple captain. But across the 38 game weeks, your captaincy choice will make up a fair portion of your total points. And if you do not nail that captaincy on average more often than most managers, you will just not be able to keep up. It is actually a very important chip. You do need to nail these captaincies. And so, in order to do that effectively, a good idea is to plan a captaincy matrix, which is what you'll see on screen. So on the left-hand side, I've just got a spreadsheet up with my initial. This was my planning before I started creating the little website with the fixture ticker, just to give a bit of an idea of who had the best fixtures and what kind of colour schemes might work, but also to set out to the right of the fixture ticker that you'll see on screen the game week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 options for the best players to captain each game week. So if we just fly through quickly, just to give a quick idea, in game week 1, Liverpool play Fulham away, which is the standout best game of the game week. Fulham are a promoted side. They also like to attack in the Championship. Probably one of the less defensive teams from the promoted options. I think you'll find Bournemouth will be a bit more of a defensive unit compared to the style of football that Fulham play. And Liverpool are a great side. They'll be vying for first and second spot again this season, assuming they don't have a horrific set of injuries. And so Salah is top of the list for game week 1, followed by the potential of the other Liverpool players. So I've just put down there Nunez, Diaz and Jota. This was before Nunez had even kicked a ball for Liverpool when I set up this spreadsheet, but they were already looking pretty likely to buy Darwin. Diaz and Jota. Jota maybe not so much, because now considering Mane's left and what's actually happening at Liverpool, Jota might actually have its minutes managed a little bit more. I mean, we've got Firmino still at Liverpool, with Darwin Núñez just signed as your solo striker, and then Jota was probably be vying for the position out on the right with Diaz, whereas Diaz looked like a little bit more of a natural player. And I think Jota does carry an injury at the moment, so he might not even be available for game week 1, but we're still 3 weeks out, so lots can change. The second most high opportunity game in game week 1 is Spurs at home to Southampton, and so Kane and Son make it as your second best options if you're not going to Liverpool. And then potentially on the outskirts, you could probably look at someone like Chelsea away to Everton, or Man City away to West Ham, although that is quite a tricky fixture. If we skip forward to game week 2, you'll see City play Bournemouth, which are a promoted side, at home, and therefore Haaland and KDB go to the top of your best options for captaincy that week. Followed by Liverpool, who play Crystal Palace at home, which is actually a bit of a tricky game. Crystal Palace were quite a cohesive unit last year, playing very well. I think quite a bit's changed in their team at the moment, so I've yet to see any preseason games or how they're performing, so that's a bit more of a wait and see. It's a bit more of a tentative thing. And then you've got a couple of more side options, I suppose, which would be your less favourable options, would be Man United playing Brentford at home. So your likes of Ronaldo or Bruno, maybe, depending on what's happening at Man United. Or Bowen at West Ham away to Nottingham Forest. Now, I'm not going to go through all 6 game weeks because you guys can do that yourself. But if I do just skip along the best options, you've got Liverpool game week 1, probably Man City game week 2, then a very close tie between Man City against Newcastle game week 3, Arsenal against Bournemouth, or Chelsea against Leeds. These are all great games. Spurs also have an okay fixture against Wolves. But then you go back to Liverpool again. Game week 4 is top of the list. Then game week 5 is Man City top of the list against promoted Nottingham Forest at home. Liverpool still coming in second. And then game week 6, you see Spurs finally as the best options, playing promoted Fulham, followed closely behind by Liverpool and then Man City. Now, what does this tell us? Liverpool and Man City are the 2 best captain options for the first 6 game weeks, pretty much. Apart from game week 6, where Liverpool is the second best and Spurs is the top, but City is still close behind with playing Aston Villa. So what you really want to having a look at this, what you want to plan for your team is an easy way to have a very good Liverpool or City option as a captain rotating each week in your team. This is why a lot of players are starting with Salah and Haaland. Salah for the game week 1 captaincy, and then Haaland for captaincy in the following game weeks. Haaland's a little bit more of a punt because obviously he's brand new to Man City, brand new to the Premier League. We're not entirely certain on how he's going to perform, or how they're actually going to line up and what kind of football they're going to be playing, and how the 5-sub rule is going to affect Man City and Pep Roulette, which has already got me a little bit nervous. But excuse me. Sorry about the coughing and sniffling in the last couple of videos. I've been getting over a cold. Time is precious when it's coming close to the launch of the game, so I'm just powering on through. So apologies for all the sniffles and whatnot. So captaincy, yes, is top of your list as one of the most important things that you must keep in the back of your mind, planned out into the future for at least 4 weeks. Minimum of 4 weeks you really want to plan out, because your captaincy options are always your premium players, pretty much. They are the most expensive players in the game, and if you do not own these players, switching to get hold of one of these players for a captaincy on a given game week can prove to be difficult, or might cost you transfers. And hits against your transfers. So if you are brand new to the game and you're not aware, you get 1 free transfer every week given to you by the game, and you can build up to a maximum of 2 banked. So if you choose not to use a transfer 1 week, the following week you will have 2 transfers to use in your squad. And if you do not use any transfers that week, you don't get any more. You're just effectively losing a transfer. So you can bank a maximum of 2 transfers to be built up, but you cannot get any more. So you do want to be using these transfers week to week to adjust your team. Now, if you want to make more than 1 trade in a week, you can do so. You can make as many trades in a week as you want, but each additional trade above your free transfer will cost you a negative 4-point hit. Now, 4 points is quite a lot. That's a goal for a striker. It's just over a point over a goal for a midfielder, or it's a clean sheet for a defender. So if you are planning to take a hit, and you need that hit to pay back in that 1 game week, that's quite a risky play, because you're really banking on whoever you're bringing in for that hit to either get your clean sheet or goal in that 1 fixture to just pay for the privilege of having that player. That's to break even. Then they have to do more in that game to make that transfer actually worthwhile. And that's what's I think a lot of people forget, is how they future project how that hit is going to pay back. So when I'm planning in my transfers if I'm going to take a hit, I try to do that over 2 to 3 game weeks. I go, look, in the next 2 to 3 game weeks, this player's going to come in. Let's hope he doesn't get injured. Of course, whenever you do this, it's risky because if the player gets injured, you've basically just wasted a transfer or your -4 points. But assuming he doesn't get doesn't get injured, the player A that you're taking out has to do, as a total across the next 3 game weeks, 4 points less than the player you bring in if you are taking a hit. Or if you're doing like a multi-move thing where you may be taking 2 or 3 players out. Let's say you've built up 2 free transfers across a couple of game weeks, and then you do like a mini wildcard to take 3 players out for a hit of 1 -4. That 1 -4 hit may be required in order to have the funds to buy a specific player that you need to buy, and so you actually have to look at how that's going to pay, or what's your risk for that entire move over the next 2 to 3 game weeks. Now note that I did say also game weeks, so in the next 2 to 3 game weeks, they're not the next 2 to 3 physical weeks in the year, because in 1 week of the year you could actually have 3 game weeks of FPL. So some of these moves in terms of actual time lapse is quite short, and so you also have to keep that in mind for the likes of teams with busy schedules. If you're taking a hit for a player that's already a bit tentative with their minutes because they've got a busy schedule, and you need that hit to pay back over the next 3 game weeks, you may find that player doesn't even play the full 90 minutes over those 3 game weeks, and you just don't make those points back. So, the reason I touched on the -4 hit and the choices on when or if you should even invoke a hit is also very closely tied into captaincy, and why I started off with captaincy first. It is a very viable strategy to take a hit in order to get the best captain for a week. If you do that across the 38 game weeks, and you do that just because you'll need the best player in each game week, I mean, it may not pay off against 38 game weeks if you're having to take a hit every single game week to get a new captaincy option, but the chances, you're basically putting yourself in the position to get the most lucky. There is a certain amount of luck in FPL. It's a very similar game to poker in the sense that poker is a game where you get, there is a certain amount of luck involved, but the best players continuously do well because they understand risk versus reward within the game of poker. It's the same in FPL. You're basically putting yourself in a statistically good position to do better than the rest of the pack. So maybe in poker game you're drawing to a flush. You've on the flop you've got 2 hearts to your 2 hearts and your covered cards in a game of Hold'em. You've got 2 cards to come. How much money are you willing to bet that you can either knock your opponent off his hand or actually snipe that flush and make the most amount of money and get paid for it? So in terms of FPL, it's, if I am bringing in Salah this week Haaland against Bournemouth game week 2 because I didn't start with him, what's the likelihood that Haaland's going to go and score a hat-trick? And people will be captaining him. So that 4-point hit, although it will cost you 4 points, it may keep you up with the pack. I mean, last year, I forget, it might have been game week 36 or something, when Man City played Wolves, KDB went out and I think he scored 4 goals or something, got 30 points without captaincy. And a lot of people were captaining him that week. That's a 60-point haul. 60 points if you captained him in that one game week. Now that doesn't happen very often, a player going out and scoring 4 goals, but it does happen each season. Like someone will score a hat-trick in the season. It's going to happen. It typically happens every year. And it's always, most of the time, the best players in the game, the most expensive players in the game, and it's typically when they're playing some of the weaker opponents. Now, Wolves is not a weak opponent in the Man City example, but because it was game week 36 last year, state of the play and how Wolves, I think they had a few injuries and they weren't even particularly playing very well. Man City were obviously flying, and KDB was coming back from injury, I believe. He'd played a couple of games but looked like he was going to start, and he just went mental. And I watched those highlights without even owning KDB and just watching my point all the people in who had actually, KDB was actually not one of the top players for that game week. He was not a standout option, but if you had identified him and put him in and captained him for that 60 points that week, man, you decimated any of your mini-team rivals. You climbed the overall rank so much in that week that any 4-point hit to do that move was well worth it. So you don't want to be necessarily taking these -4 hits for, someone from Crystal Palace, like a Matera to captain against like a Nottingham Forest or something, because the likelihood is, although he might score a goal or get an assist and Crystal Palace might beat them, they're not going to do a Man City and absolutely demolish them where one player goes and gets 60 points. So whenever you're assessing the cost of your 4-point hit for a transfer and whatever structure of transfers your team requires for a week, whether it's 1 transfer, 2, 3, or even 4 transfers in a week. If some people do take -12 hits, -16 hits, because they are looking 4 to 5 game weeks out and looking at their current team going, oh my god, there's a whole bunch of injuries and cancellations, or I just didn't plan very well and this team's not going to perform for the next 4 weeks, and so they will just take hits, restructure their whole team and just play it out. That you play it out over the next 4 game weeks to make sure that 12 points is paid back within that time. It's very hard to, the further out if you go in the next 20 game weeks, it's going to pay back. Very hard to go back and actually assess whether or not that made sense. So you really want to keep it quite shallow. 4 weeks is already quite far out. I'm always trying to get my points back within 3 game weeks, because anything past that, too much changes in the game, and you may not be able to even reflectively say at the end of that 3 game weeks whether or not you have actually made those points back. If the very next game week a whole bunch of cancellations come in and you have to take more hits, how do you even calculate that? So be careful with your hits. I'm not saying go out and take hits left, right and centre, but definitely assess a hit properly. I see a lot of content creators out there going, don't take hits, or take hits. It's like, or take a hit early in the week, or just don't take hits at all. Definitely don't take hits early, and especially not if the value is going to change. These are all very broad, vast statements that just say do not do something for the whole game. It's quite restrictive. So I'm more of the mind of, if you are considering taking a hit, you need to cost benefit and analyze that to see whether or not that 4-point spend is worth it. Now, it is still obviously a projection and an estimation, same as in football. So make sure, in poker. So make sure that you are betting with those 4-point hits on the best players in the game against the best opponents in the game. I wouldn't necessarily take a hit for Salah, even though he may be flying and scored hat-trick leading up to a game against Man City. I wouldn't be spending a hit to bring Salah in against Man City, for example, even though Salah's probably going to be the highest point total scorer in the game. That fixture is just terrible. So cost-benefit analysis, do sit down and have a look at how that hit is going to affect your overall rank. So I've briefly touched on it here, but captaincy, you really do want to be captaining the top players in the game, and as a matter of, just a specific guideline to try and follow throughout the season. Now, you don't need to stick to this, but if you are choosing a captain, try to keep it in the top 6 teams, just in general, because those teams are more likely win games. And when teams win games, that's when there's more FPL points up for grabs. Now, you may miss the player within the team that actually grabs the points, but you do maximize your potential for actually gaining those points. So if you are choosing to captain a differential, so a player that's not part of either, I would say at the start of the season, you go on last year's top 6 placement teams, whereas, I don't know, about 8 to 10 weeks into the season, you probably have a pretty good idea of how teams are shaping up, and you'll have a good idea of who are going to be the likely top 6 teams this year. So try and keep your captaincy options in there. That's just to minimize your risk of captaincy across the 38 game weeks. Now, Another word that a lot of content creators out there, well, some of them loathe this word, some of them absolutely hate the concept, but it is effective ownership, abbreviated to EO. It is looking at how many players in the game own this player, plus how many players have captained this player. So, because you get double the points for a captaincy, you have to calculate effective ownership of a captain when captains are in play a little bit different. So you can get, you might find that at the moment Salah is owned by, how much is Salah owned by? If we just sort by team selected by percent, we've got Salah at 58.1% ownership within the game. However, if every single player in the game that owned Salah, so 58.1% of the players, captained Salah in the first game week against Fulham, that's actually 2 Salahs. And so your effective ownership would double at that point if all of them did it. And so instead of an effective ownership of 58.1%, you have an ownership of 116.2%. And that's how you actually have players that are more owned than you possibly can in the game of 100%. Now that may not make sense to people, but because of in terms of just general ownership, that's why it's called effective ownership, because you're scoring double the amounts of points for any captain. So it is a good idea to keep an eye on who are the best captaincy options, because that'll give you an idea of what the effective ownership might be for that game week. And if you are choosing to go against the standout captain if you are choosing to go against the standout captain option with a differential captain, how much could that burn you? Really is what it breaks down to. And this is why managers hate it, because they look at effective ownership and they go, oh shit, if I get this wrong and Salah, I don't want to captain Salah against Fulham for some reason. Potentially they're thinking, I don't know, Haaland's really good on in the air, for example. I'm just making up a scenario here, and let's say that West Ham centre-backs, I don't know, has a bung knee, can't jump, and so you might choose Haaland as a captain over Salah in game week 1 or whatever. With 116% effective ownership on Salah versus Haaland, if Salah goes out and scores a hat-trick, that's 116% of the game that's actually going to get 3 times hat-trick worth of points, plus bonus, plus whatever else he does in the game, versus whatever Haaland does. And so let's assume that Haaland doesn't get his hat-trick against Man City, you will be down that many points on the game, because 100% of the game actually there was 116% effective ownership of Salah. And that's where decisions need to be made. You need to be aware of that effective ownership and what the cost will be to you if you go against it and do not succeed. However, that is also the way to gain rank on your opponents. Now, I wouldn't go against Salah against Fulham in the first game, but there will be other games further down the line where, say, Liverpool have a tricky game and City have a semi-tricky game. And the effective ownership may be lumped on someone weird like Kai Havertz, for example, last season, which did make sense, but then you're putting a lot of faith in Kai Havertz to actually do well when Salah was playing Man United. I had already learnt the lesson to not go against Man United versus Liverpool, having benched Cancelo in that first game and left 14 points sitting on the bench because I'm a United supporter and I'm an idiot. But the same thing happened with Havertz later, and I think I ended up captaining Salah, who did quite well that week, and I gained quite a lot of rank as going against the effective owner, the EO stats, because I thought, there are what you would call groupthink, mass hysteria. One FPL content creator gets a good idea and everyone thinks that's also a good idea, opinions can get swayed quite easily. So to also make sure that you're sitting back, assessing the situation and making your own decisions about how risky a move is going against a high EO player for captaincy in any given game week. So on to transfers. So transfers, is a balance, is the way that you balance your team throughout the season. It's a constant act of balancing value versus form versus fixtures versus effective ownership versus upcoming schedules in future that you may be planning for. There's a lot going on. It's the one of the main moves that you make each week is your transfer. And so some things to keep in mind when you're doing your transfers. First of all, try to bank on a talisman. You want players in your team that are going to play 90 minutes per match. Or if not 90 minutes, at least start the match and try to get through your first 60 minutes. You want as many 90-minute players in your team as possible because that will just maximize your chance of those players getting returns. Kind of makes sense. But in the excitement of an early haul from an, I don't know, a left-wing player, you might think, holy hell, that guy's cheap and he's got a couple of good fixtures, but he's only in the team because your first choice starter's injured for the first couple of game weeks and is slated to come in 2 weeks' time. And so transferring in a player who's not a talisman, who may only be there for a little while, or he's currently trying to earn a spot in the team, could mean that he actually loses a spot in the team and you're forced to make a transfer. Now, you want to avoid that as much as possible while still assessing the risk of putting players in that may be being overlooked by the general community. Because on the whole, the general community will play safe. That's just how the game works. It's a general rule of thumb. Like, most players in the game will play safe. So you do have to take risks if you want to beat the game. Like, the best managers, like Fabio Borges is the all-time top-ranked FPL manager of the game. I had a look at his season last season. He just fills his team with talismans. Doesn't seem to care too much about team value, which is fine. Some managers do not care about team value. I place more importance on it because there's been so many times in the past where I've been in a season, I'm like, fuck, I really need this player, and I'm 0.2 short. It's game week 18, and I've made some mistakes in game week 3 around some value adds that I didn't quite catch up on, and I don't have that 0.2 million to bring in KDB to score 60 points against a run-of-the-mill Wolves. And that's when it's very hard to evaluate that loss of value earlier in the season to make those moves later in the season. And quite a lot of managers won't even pull up the fact that they've made that mistake early on and remember it 20 weeks down the track to actually pull it up and go, fuck, I can't buy this player, and that's because of the mistake I made earlier in the season. It doesn't come up too often. In fact, I haven't heard it very often at all. So that's something I have definitely done in the past. It has definitely hurt me in the past, and I definitely do my best to make sure that I am at least considering it as part of my strategy for the transfers that week. Now, another common thing that you may pick up on when you find your favorite FPL content creators and listen to them week on week is you will find some content creators that have been burned by a particular player in seasons of past. This puts a bit of a bias in their minds and will come out in the recommendations and advice that they are giving on their videos. They will be given that advice sometimes without even realizing that it's a biased advice. Some of them do point it out and go, yeah, well, I bought Mahrez in the past and he's played one. He got on for 10 minutes in 4 game weeks, and it was just an absolute horrific idea, and so they'll just avoid Mahrez at all costs. Mahrez has burnt me in the past as well, but Mahrez is a great player who will bang goals if he's on the pitch. So even though he is a risky choice in the Pep Roulette system, if you nail him if you go for an aggressive play and pull him in for 2 weeks where he's very likely to play and he goes mental, and then you sub him out again and take all his points and run away, you're laughing. And that's how this game will be won. So I mentioned Fabio Borges. I think Mark Southerns in FPL Black Box commented to Az, or maybe vice versa, maybe Az commented to Mark Southerns, one of the two ways around, when they were talking about Fabio Borges. A question came up, will he ever win the game? Now, he's a very astute manager, he's a very safe manager, and he is a methodic manager based on what I can pick up from overviewing his team at the end of the season. He doesn't go on any podcasts. I don't think I've actually ever seen him speak in front of a camera. So I'm only going based on what I can draw as conclusions from my own opinions from reviewing his season reviews. But he just seems like a stalwart. Like, he will pick the talismans, form over fixtures, fixtures over form, and he will happily catch players. Like last season, he seemed to miss, I think it was about 4 or 5 players at the start of the season each week, and he'd give them a couple of weeks to make sure that they were definitely locked in and going to be talisman, and he wouldn't have to deal with them later, and then he'd transfer them into the team a couple of weeks after it seemed like they were definitely bedded in, so he didn't have to deal with them. Now, that's a safe way to play the game, and it's limiting future hits and future transfers for sure, but he is missing out on those 2 weeks where the whole game doesn't have the player, and he is not catching those points on top of every other player. So he is playing the game in a way that he is assuming most other managers will make mistakes, rather than he will play the most optimal move each game in order to gain the ranks quicker. So if you have a 0.1% owned player and you have identified that player and you put them in your squad and they get a hat-trick that week, you're the only person with all those points. You shoot through the ranks. Now that's the risk. You don't want to be doing that every week, because a 0.1% owned player is a 0.1% owned player for a reason. However, they are out there. But if you only stick to your 80%, 60%, 50% owned players, when that player gets the hat-trick, about 100% of the rest of the game gets that hat-trick, and so you don't actually gain any rank rises over the players that you are competing with. And so, although a stalwart approach will get you to be the best manager of all time, the conclusion that Az and Mark came to, and I tend to agree with, is he won't win the game, ever. Because you do need a little bit of luck to win the game, and the luck only comes with a little bit of risk. Calculated risk, not crazy risk, but some risk. You got to have some risk somewhere. And where you choose to place that risk, whether it's a low EO playing player, or maybe killing your bench, as I'm doing so at the start of the season, or loading up on a couple of differentials in your team to be surrounded by what you would call your shields. So I will touch on another thing that has come up in the past. I forget who coined the term. It came up in I think it was an article on Fantasy Football Scout a couple of years ago, and it popped into a Scoutcast episode a few years back, and it was an explanation of swords versus shields. Now, this is kind of basically just a nice way to summarize, effective ownership or just general ownership of players, is how many players in your team are your shields, i.e. if this player gets a hat-trick, everyone's going to get the hat-trick, and so therefore I'm not going to lose ground by not having this player, even though everyone's got him. I still need him, because he's a shield against a hat-trick if he scores a hat-trick. So Salah, game week 1 against Fulham, could quite easily score a hat-trick. It's a prime fixture for him to score a hat-trick. He always starts the season well. Fulham a promoted side. They will be eager. They're at home. They'll be willing to impress their fans. They may be playing less defensive in order to do so, and Liverpool could tear them to pieces. So you're going to want a Salah in your team, and if he scores a hat-trick, everyone's going to have him. If you didn't captain him, and everyone captained him, you've missed out on a hat-trick worth of points, and so therefore that's not a very good shield. You actually have to captain him, and this is why some people hate the effective ownership, because it forces a decision. But what they are not thinking about is the fact it's forcing the best decision in the game. Yes, it's a forced decision, but it's a forced decision for a reason. Salah is, by standout, the best option for game week 1 as a captain. Why are you unhappy that is the thing? I think it's because those players love the fact that they choose captains better than most players, and if it's an obvious captain, potentially that's how they get their most rank rises throughout the season. Whereas in the first half of last season, the only way to get a rank rise was to have the players around Salah being structured better and doing better as a whole than Salah, because Salah was just set and forget captain for about 16 or 18 game weeks for the first half of the season. It was ridiculous. You couldn't make any ground on him. And if you didn't captain him, you lost ground. And so it was just a dead spot in your team that captained every week. And so the only way you can make rank rises is hoping Salah doesn't do well in one game week and your captain does better and so you gain points. Or the surrounding players in your team are the players that are going to do the damage to your opponents in the league. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So your swords in this case, your shields for game week 1 I'd say is Salah, Trent Alexander-Arnold, some sort of City defender, probably some sort of Chelsea defender, maybe Haaland. I'd say Haaland is probably going to be a shield at the start of the season because his ownership's going to be so high. But then you got to go looking for your swords. Who's going to attack? Who are your players that are actually going to make ground in your mini leagues and your overall ranks and whatnot? And so you do have to have a couple of aces up your sleeve in order to gain those ranks. Because if you're captaining Salah and everyone else is captaining Salah, that's the only way you're going to get up in the game. So, find the time to scout. The eye test tells a tale that pure statisticians could only dream of. Yeah, stats are great, and a lot of players out there, a lot of managers, and a lot of content creators will talk about expected goals conceded, expected assist, all your expected stats, and those things are essential and important. Do not get me wrong, those things are very good units of measure. They give you a very good broad overview of what's going on in the game, but they do not give you the detail. No, they do not. If there is a ball whipped in, say from Trent Alexander-Arnold, that just misses Salah's toe by a hair in front of an open net and goes out for a free kick, the stats won't tell you that because Salah didn't even get a touch on the ball, even though if he did, he was going to score in an open net. And so you'll just miss those in the stats if you do not watch the game. You will also miss positioning. I was watching the Chelsea pre-season match against somewhere in America. And if I bring this up on screen, hopefully you can see that okay. Yeah. I took a screenshot of the first half. So I've been toying up between Chilwell and James as my Chelsea defender option, and I have noted in previous videos that Chilwell's more attacking option, and he's just the more attacking player. And so if he's on the pitch, I think Tuchel just says to James, look, you need to stick back because Chilwell he ends up in the box, and you can't be in the box because then we've only got 2 centre backs. So please hang back a bit and just deliver the ball in. Now, other content creators have said, yep, James will deliver the ball and he'll get a lot more assists than Chilwell, who will be at the back post receiving the ball and scoring the goals. That's somewhat true, but there's also fantasy assists in the game, which is not a direct assist. It is when James delivers the ball to Chilwell, Chilwell picks up the ball, has a shot, keeper saves the shot and it deflects to Havertz standing in front of an open net and he taps it in. Chilwell gets that assist for the shot. He also gets some bonus points for a shot on target and testing the keeper. And he gets the assist for Havertz finishing the goal. And poor old James, who delivered a beautiful ball, gets nothing. So, yes, Chilwell will score more goals. And yes, James will get more assists. But Chilwell will also pick up those assists for those goals that do not do get reflected and rebounded. There's also other avenues to points for Chilwell as well. But I bring this up on screen because Chilwell started the game for Chelsea. It looked like their B-string squad actually started the game, and that's because Chilwell was injured for pretty much the whole season, and so he's unfit and starting in the B-side team, or what looked like the B-side team in terms of the players that lined up. But what you'll see on screen is smack bang on the edge of the 18-yard box in the centre of the goal, free, when this number 23, I think it's Sarr, decides to have a shot on a tight angle between 2 players, which actually had a great shot and closely missed. He could have quite easily squared this ball to Chilwell, who's just standing in no man's land, not even marked. Now this build-up, this is the end of the play. Chilwell actually started this movement in left back. He played the ball down the wing to whoever was playing in front of him on the left wing. I forget because there was another B team player. And then that guy ran forward and then he cut back and Chilwell had already made amazing runs. So he played the ball into Chilwell. Chilwell does a 1-2 with someone. Chilwell continues his run and ends up where you see on screen with number 23 holding the ball on the edge of the area. So he's sitting in a beautiful spot. And that's what I like to see from Chilwell. Yes, it's only first game, and yes, they're playing a really easy opponent, and maybe he's not going to be sitting there open as quite as free, but it just does go to show that no statistician is going to be able to pull up a figure that says that Chilwell was sitting pretty there and didn't get given the ball. That's why the eye test is super important. So and part of your transfers each week, and yes, there is some risk in making early transfers as well to catch price rises. Yeah, your player might get injured in training throughout the week. However, that does hardly ever happen. It's very rare that you buy a player early for one game week that then goes and trains that week and gets injured in that one game week. It doesn't happen very often. Does happen. People do get burnt by it, and that's why people talk about it, because they hate it. But the likelihood of it happening is actually pretty low. Of course, the later you wait into the week, the more information you have to make decisions. But for example, if you're going to be priced out of something and you know you're going to want that player regardless, and you're just waiting to see if he gets injured during training. Let's just say, look, you don't have Haaland for game week 1 because you don't like the West Ham fixture, but you definitely want him for Bournemouth game week 2. After the game week 1 schedule goes down and Haaland scored 2 goals against West Ham and he's about to go up to 11.7 million by Wednesday, are you still going to wait until he's had his midweek training to see if he gets injured? Or are you going to take the risk that you can only afford to buy Haaland now and buy him? That's up to you as a manager. I would look at that and go, Haaland could go absolutely mental against Bournemouth. Fuck it, I'm buying him. Otherwise, because, if you've got all your funds tied up and he is going to go up by 0.2 million, that's 2 transfers. So later in the week, I would have to take a hit to get that player. Yes, I might be able to cover that player with someone else from Man City, but if Haaland's going to score a hat-trick, doesn't mean anyone else in the team is necessarily going to do well, because it could be 3 different assisters and they could concede a goal. So they could win 3-1. And Haaland just comes out with all the points and the rest of the points are just split elsewhere. So, yes, you can cover, but for your standout options, sometimes you do have to take the risk of that early transfer. And so, just having a hard and fast rule of do not make early moves, I would take that with a little bit of caution and say, assess the risk of making those early transfers and how much it might potentially cost you. Don't go taking a 12-point hit right early in the game week because you want 3 new players. I mean, obviously, there are limits, but, situationally dependent, team dependent, obviously you'll hear that a lot. But if you really want one player and you can't afford it later in the week and you're just waiting to see if he's going to get injured in training, might be worth taking that risk. However, if they have a midweek game, that's kind of different. Let's say City's playing Champions League Madrid midweek and on a Wednesday before the game on a Saturday. I would be waiting until after that UCL fixture to try and buy Haaland, even if his price was changing, because players will get injured in a match more regularly than they will in training throughout the week. I mean, I've been playing football my whole life. People hardly ever get injured in training because you don't go as hard against your teammates in training as you do on the pitch on the weekend. So, yeah, you might pull a muscle or maybe roll an ankle or whatever, but it doesn't happen incredibly often, or so much so that you should put a rule down that says just never do this thing. Right, I think that's most of it. I'm just going through my notes. Yeah, Okay, so that's most of it. I mean, I've got a couple more points here about how many of your team is playing against the top six teams this week or playing against bottom six teams. That's something you kind of just want to keep a balance on throughout the season as you're making transfers, because you want your team full of the best players from the best teams, and when those teams are playing the worst teams, to absolutely maximize the point potential that any player in your team is going to get. So always sit down and assess, all right, how many players do I have from Liverpool, City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Spurs, and United or West Ham? I wouldn't put United in there yet, but they are looking good pre-season. I won't go into Man United because I go into them everything, but I will be keeping a close eye on them for their price. Their price is just, woo-wee, they could do really well. So you can see here that I've got, okay, two Brentford goalkeepers, which is not a top six side, but I've got Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, City, Spurs, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, okay, Wolves, City, and then two dead bench members. So as you can see, I'm really honing in on those top six teams and focusing on those teams that do have an easy run of fixtures playing the lower league teams. So largely City and Liverpool to start the season, and Chelsea after game week 3, and Arsenal have just got a great run for ages, and some sort of defensive thing. Now you will see in my team, I will just touch on briefly, Perišić is still sitting in there. He is now become a slight concern for me after having watched the Spurs versus, they played someone in America as well, I think. So they played the K-League All-Stars. Watched that game. It was quite cool. His son took a penalty and chipped the goalkeeper in front of his K-League fans, which is awesome. I absolutely loved that. I thought he was going to smash it. He just dinks it down the middle. But Perišić did not get onto the field. Reports are that he is carrying a little bit of a niggly injury in his hip, I think. I have to double check that. And that's why he was named, I think, on the I don't even know if he was named on the bench. He didn't make either of the games. That's quite concerning. The season finished a while ago. We're already well into pre-season, and if you've been keeping up to date with what Conte's actually doing with Spurs, you've got photos of Harry Kane throwing up on the sideline from trying to get fit and go through all the fitness sessions that Conte's chucking them through. If Perišić is still injured, how much training is he doing? How fit is he? Is he going to even be able to play in this wing-back system from game week 1? I'm concerned now, and that means I either need to reassess my backline and maybe replace Perišić with another 5.5 defender of equal stature and points potential, of which I don't think there are too many, or drop down to a 5 mil option in the likes of, say, Matty Cash or Luca Dean, to start the season and hold on to that 0.5 million until I'm comfortable that Perišić will actually start. We will wait till we get a little bit closer to the season, but that Perišić sword, because his is actually, I think he's, wow, what is his ownership now? We're up to 2.535 million players, and I don't even have him there. Perišić should just use it here. 40.3%. Okay, so he's now a bit more of a shield because he's owned by almost half the game because of his price and his points potential, obviously. But if he is not going to start the season, he definitely shouldn't be in your squad. You almost be looking at switching across to Doherty is probably the better option, rather than looking at Perisić's replacement in Sessegnon, because you will not know necessarily when Sessegnon is going to be out of favour and Perisić is back in. So making that trade in that 1 week when that happens, the timing on that will be a bit tricky. Whereas if you choose someone like Doherty, assuming he doesn't have any competition in his spot, he won't get rotated out. So you might see Perišić come in 1 week and Sessegnon get dropped out, and then you can go the following week and go, oh, actually I'll do a sideways move across to Perišić now, rather than having Sessegnon in your team and going, fuck, Sessegnon didn't even start this week. I didn't know that Perišić was, and I had to make that trade for this one game week because that was the week that they traded over. So that's a risk that is now entered into my thoughts and my team. If I do drop down to a 5 million option, that will become probably a new sword, and I all need to assess appropriately, and also what I end up doing with the extra 0.5 million. So could be looking at the likes of, I already don't like Neto. Like Neto to me he's underpriced. He was 6.5 million, and it's because he only played a certain amount of minutes last year, a very small amount of minutes. But I just don't like that price point, really, I think is what it really breaks down to. If he doesn't do well, who do I go to? I have to go up. And that's somewhat, that means if I'm going up, I either need that money in the bank or I need to trade someone out somewhere else. Anyway, that's kind of a team-specific delve into just how to assess your swords versus shields and how those things may change over time. So at the moment, Perišić is a shield, sitting at 40 point something %. He may be a risk too far for this injury, and so he might be everyone thinking he's a shield and just not a shield at all. He might be a terrible pick come game week 1 if he's not going to start. Definitely something to keep in mind. Anyway, that is the video for today. I've covered all the notes that I had written down. If you did make it through the video, please do give this video a like if you liked the content. Also do give us a subscribe so that you can see more future videos popping up as we get closer and closer to game week 1. And let us know how your teams are shaping up. What kind of strategy points have I missed? What strategies are you guys employing that potentially I've missed out, and maybe something really important that could help me climb those ranks or help those other players out there that are watching the content to climb the ranks too? Because although I want to do really well in this game, everyone that watches the content, I hope I'm providing good content so that you guys can do well in your mini leagues too. So it gives you some new things to think about. And I'd love to hear your feedback about what you guys think about too. So drop me a comments below, and I will catch you around again sometime soon.